Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Mafia and Gangsters video. Well, I haven't done one of these videos in a while, so I thought I would mix this one in for this playlist. This one having to do yet again with one of the other lesser known mobsters. In fact, someone that actually became a boss within the Los Angeles crime family. Unfortunately, there's not much information known about him, and I'll explain as much as I can here for this video, but he definitely had an interesting name. He was actually born as Giuseppe Ernesto Ardizzone, but eventually he Americanized his name to Joseph Ardizzone, and more importantly, his nickname became known as Joe Iron Man Ardizzone. So very fascinating information when I came across that particular title. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the information associated with this crime boss. And again, I'll try to present as much info as I can, including his actual disappearance. As it turns out, he's one of the first ones that I've mentioned here that actually disappeared and was never ever found again. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the information again associated with this crime boss of the Los Angeles crime family. So who was this Joseph Iron Man Ardizzone? Well, again, he was actually someone that was born Giuseppe Ernesto Ardizzone back on November 19th, 1884, there in Palermo, Sicily. In fact, he was born on that date to a parent by the name of Antonio Ardizzone, although I don't know exactly who his mother's name was. But in any case, they were born there in Sicily, and then eventually his father first moved over to the United States in the late 19th century. In fact, he ended up being in Louisiana and then moving over to Southern California. And as it turns out, he became more of like a rags to riches type story, because it was there in Southern California that his father became a wealthy farmer and a winemaker, and that eventually allowed his other children, including Giuseppe or Joseph, to come over to the United States. In fact, he was one of the last known members of the family to be able to move over to the United States. And as it turns out, this family was in turn known to other families that were there in Sicily, including the families with the last name Chuchias and then also the last name Matrangas. This Matranga family, though, was actually the one that ended up being a bane of sorts with this guy, Joseph Ardizzone. For reasons unknown, as it turns out, he became involved in a dispute with the Matrangas, and this dispute eventually came over to Los Angeles as well. And then things really kicked off to another level, because on July 2nd, 1908, in an act of what he called that Joseph called self-defense, he ended up killing a member of the Matranga alley named George Maisano. And when that happened, that's when he fled California. He hid in several different other states, but eventually coming back around 1915, he was arrested for this murder, but all charges were eventually dropped. But that essentially took things to another level and may have been involved with his disappearance later on. More on that here in a minute. But yes, eventually he settled still in California. He married a young girl by the name of Elsa. They ended up living in Sunland there, and then they had a family there as well. But there were some mysterious circumstances that befell Joseph Ardizzone in his home, because as it turns out, it was burned down and it was suspected to be caused by arsonists. That tells me that this was very, very specific, like that was very planned, in other words, because here you have something like this involving his home specifically burned down, again, right after all of this stuff happened, especially with whatever was associated with his feud with the Matranga family. And yet here he had, and coming back from this arrest and being let go for that murder, that you have all of a sudden his home being burned down. So again, still mysterious circumstances, but interesting information to share on that regard. And then somewhere along the way, especially towards the 1920s, this guy, Joseph Ardizzone, again, Iron Man Joe, I tried to see why his name was specifically Iron Man. I didn't really find information associated with it. Unfortunately, it's just something that must must have been tagged to him somewhere along the line of his life, and then eventually it stuck there. But eventually he became a member of the mafia there in California, specifically with the Los Angeles crime family. And somewhere along the way, he ended up moving upwards and upwards, eventually assuming a role of a leadership position. In fact, when Rosario de Simón resigned from the Los Angeles crime family, as it turns out, Joseph Ardizzone became the next chief of that family. Again, unfortunately, mysterious information is tied as to how he became, again, such a prominent position within that family, and how he was able to, what actions he did so. What ties to it is this gentleman, this guy, Joseph Ardizzone, claimed on one area I read that he claimed to have killed over 30 men. So that gives you an idea about the streak that he had, the violent streak that he had. No conscience, nothing else when it came to doing these type of contract hits. In another area, I read that it was actually, he claimed to have over 100 men killed. So if we go either by the figure of 30 people or 100 people, it tells you again that he was definitely involved with a lot of contract murders, or who knows if they were even contract murders at all. But that again gives you an idea of how he became so prominent in terms of a leadership position and eventually the chief of the Los Angeles crime family. Even though not much information is known about how that occurred, that still ties into that. Also, another thing that ties into it is this. Apparently, he was heavily involved in bootlegging, especially during the time period of Prohibition. Something I've mentioned in so many of my other recent videos, especially during that time period. Here, though, it was in California where the Los Angeles crime family was involved in bootlegging. And he was in turn heavily involved with it as well, obviously because of so much riches associated with this type of activity in the world of the mafia. And then, of course, with everything else tied to it in terms of the dollars coming in. Also, another thing that pointed to him being involved with a leadership position was this. During the Castellammarese War that happened in the 1930s, he was apparently involved with siding with Salvatore Maranzano. Because as it turns out, there was a conference that was being done there in California, and two mysterious men were seen backed during this conference with Salvatore Maranzano, and it's been presumed that one of those men was Joseph, or Iron Man Joseph Ardizzone during this time period too. So again, lots of loose information, but still lots of connections that showcase what he was doing when he was involved with his members of the mafia there, the California crime family, or Los Angeles crime family, and then also again assuming his leadership position there. But this eventual leadership position did come with some opposition. It was again during this time period of the 1930s that there were several attempts on him. There was a faction or a small group of people that were apparently posing Iron Man Joe, and when this happened, they attempted something on his life. In fact, in early 1931, he was driving with his friend somewhere there in Los Angeles. His friend was named Jimmy Basile, and there was an attempt made. You could imagine that this was more like a drive-by shooting. Whoever did this found the car that Iron Man Joe was driving, and as they did so, they must have shot straight at them. They wounded Joseph Ardizzone, but they ended up killing Jimmy Basile. In fact, he was so wounded that Joseph Ardizzone went over to a house of Leon de Simón, and he was treated there, and then eventually went to the hospital. But as it turns out, almost like something straight out of The Godfather. Remember in The Godfather, whenever Vito Corleone was actually attempted, like in terms of an assassination, he ended up going to the hospital and he survived. But then there was another attempt there. Like there was another group that drove up to that location, to the hospital, to try to commit that hit. Well, as it turns out, this is what happened in real life here. There he was recuperating, Joseph Ardizzone, in the hospital. But as he was recuperating, another set of individuals attempted something there at the hospital. I don't know if they were actually able to go into the hospital or if they were able to do something there, even as far as going into his room. But this was prevented because Joseph Ardizzone's family, members of the family, came by, the mafia family, in other words, came by and acted up as bodyguards, either outside the hospital or maybe outside the room. And this in turn prevented something happening to him, at least the second go around. Isn't that fascinating? No, I wonder if the Godfather, whenever Mario Puzo did his novel, I wonder if he in turn used this as an influence whenever Vito's son Michael was again there protecting his father there at the hospital, making sure that nothing else happened to him because he correctly assumed that there was going to be another hit associated with Vito Corleone. And so I'm wondering again, it's if that influence, it's a weird way of life imitating art and so on. But then as it turns out later that year, towards October 15th, 1931, up until that point, that's when Joseph Ardizzone, our man Joe, decided he was going to retire. He made it seem like it was public too. He must have been telling other people, underworld sources, and then of course eventually told others that, hey, I no longer want to be in this lifestyle. I don't want to have these hits associated with me. And so he wanted to let everyone know that he was going to retire after these attempted hits. But on October 15th, 1931, someone else still did something. In fact, he was on his way, once again driving to another location. Joseph Ardizzone was driving to his cousin's house in Etiwanda, and as it turns out, he never made it. He actually disappeared. No one knows what happened to him during that drive. Someone did something. Someone made him disappear, but no one knows exactly what occurred because he never arrived. There was an intense search that was done. They were trying to find not only the car, but obviously the body. Investigators, police, everyone else, the mafia members, they did so. As far as the diligent search, nothing was ever found. In fact, he was driving to the house with a 41 caliber Colt, so he was definitely armed at the time. But whatever happened, whatever occurred, whoever did it, especially as how they did it, they were able to disarm him, and then he was gone. He was gone from the face of the earth, never ever found again. And in fact, it was only until about 7 or 8 years later that Joe Iron Man Ardizzone was officially declared dead by his wife, and then that was it. There was nothing else in terms of any other history or any other information found as to what happened to him, his body, anything else along those lines. And that was it. That's essentially what happened to Joseph Ardizzone. Some suspects, in fact, ended up being a guy, some people named by Frank and Nick Borgia. And he was someone, in fact, that was involved with the mafia as well. But as it turns out, again, another ruling was the strong rivalry that was associated with the Matrangas family, those suspects as well that was involved with this disappearance, because again of everything that happened earlier with the murder of that ally of the Matranga family, and then of course Joseph Ardizzone being let go, nothing charged against him. Here you have something like this that could have come back to haunt him all these years afterward. But no evidence is associated with either them being tied to this disappearance or Frank and Nick Borgia being tied to this disappearance. It's just all suspicion at this point. But that's pretty much it. That's all the information associated with Joseph Iron Man Joe Ardizzone. If anyone has any more information, anything else I might have missed, then please post those comments below. What about those that are there in the Los Angeles area, especially those that know more information on the Los Angeles crime family? Maybe they can point to more information as to this disappearance and other rumors associated as to what caused his initial disappearance. But who knows, maybe sometime in the future some evidence will be found, maybe a body or some other type of link associated with that disappearance, and we'll have more information that I can report here afterward. All right, everybody, thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.